Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a huge collection of videos on monster ecology, fantasy world history, cosmology, character classes, and magic items that you can binge watch on my channel to your heart's content. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button down below, or backing me on Patreon, where you can get access to all of the scripts I write for these vids if you prefer to read what I'm saying. I also have a Discord server with an active community, and of course, subscribe to me here as I upload 2 videos per week with a live stream every weekend. Skeletons. A good place to start with an updated and remastered series on the Undead in Dungeons & Dragons. Skeletons may, at first glance, seem fairly simple. Piles of bone animated by necrotic energy. They're not going to try and eat your character's face, but skeletons are possessed of a rudimentary intelligence at the very least. They're not mindless, they have some problem-solving abilities. And this intellect has nothing to do with whatever they were in life. Kind of. They literally have no brain, so what exactly is animating a skeleton? Grab yourself a beverage, settle in my friends, because we're about to get deeply nerdy. Skeletons are actually my favourite undead monster, mainly because of that little mystery of what is actually inhabiting that bone shell, but also because of the staggering variety and scope of weird innovation that I can pack into this undead type. I have so many of these ideas to share with you. Animated skeletons have always been a part of fantasy role-playing games. Usually they're one of the first low-level undead that a player character encounters, easy for a player to defeat in combat, particularly if that player character has some sort of a blunt, bludgeoning weapon with which to smash them to pieces. A vulnerability that's always been pretty integral to what they are. Skeletons make do with what they have. Humanoid skeletons are commonly armed with weapons. The stat block in 5th edition includes both a short sword and a short bow as weapon options, and the skeletons are usually depicted as wearing armour, or in the case of 5th edition, again, it's stated as armour scraps. Some games may also introduce high-level variants with heightened resilience or combat skills, as well as the ability to cast spells or have some ability to communicate. Skeletons may be created by a necromancer or a dark priest, a cult leader, a shaman or wizard, in which case they will be under the control of whoever created them. But they can also arise spontaneously in areas of highly concentrated evil, and where there is some fundamental disruption of the normal flow of life and death, or there's some breach in the barriers between planes. In cases where dark entities are creeping into the prime material plane, they are not under any control, but they don't seem to have any understanding of the prime material plane and try to absorb some of the understanding from the bones they're inhabiting. So let's take a brief trip to the negative energy plane and try to understand why they have such cognitive difficulties, shall we say. It is endless darkness. There are no stars, no planets except for burnt-out cores of long-dead suns. So reduced in volume, they're little more than super-dense asteroids. The unimaginable vastness of time is at an end. All that is left of the living and shining stars and their worlds is almost completely forgotten. There is just the void, the dark, the cold, and those things that persist without body and without purpose, entities which swarm in enormous numbers with nowhere else to go, clustered around any object they can find in the vast nothing. There are strange anomalies here. Such a huge mass of emptiness has weird effects, concentrations that can form actual chunks of void that would seem to be physical objects, but it's really more like compressed emptiness. The plane is inimical to life, matter, and light. Any form of energy that appears here is greedily sucked away and utterly consumed. Any living being, even with heavy magical protection, has only a limited time before they would simply vaporize in the excruciating cold and airless vacuum, until even their dust broke apart and the atoms were torn down as well. The entities that do dwell here have no understanding of life, of light, of planets and plants and animals. They have no memory left of ever being alive. Without anything to see or do, with nothing other than each other to interact with, and any interactions being a desperate hunger to take something, anything new from each other, they are just husks of awareness, almost catatonic, long past the point where they have enough energy even for insanity. Every now and then, though, over the span of time immeasurable, since there is nothing left to measure it by, some disturbance, some ripple creates a doorway, and some of these things may slip through. into a blinding, burning, urgent, explosive, searing overload of existence in the prime material plane. These entities seek whatever shelter they can. Most are summoned into containers already prepared for them. The hungry entities latch onto the matter of these bodies and begin a kind of raw process where the utter emptiness starts breaking down the very matter around them. And this negative energy flow provides a sort of vitality, a negative energy they can use to animate, move, and create a twisted sort of life. Very efficiently, since matter has so much energy bound up inside it. The process can last for an enormous period of time. These entities are immortal, their connection to the prime material plane is feeble, and their experience of it is horrible. It's like being burned alive. They hunger for energy, but there's just too much. The living beings around them are nova flares of vitality that scorch them. The entities that inhabit skeletons can make little sense of where they are or what they're experiencing. They are so easy to control because any sort of guidance is at least some purpose, a small comfort, a lifeline or beacon they can cling to in this inferno. As a skeleton rises and experiences gravity and time, objects and movement, it's like you or I waking up and surfing a magnetic flare on the surface of the sun, yet somehow not being instantly destroyed. So a skeleton is forced to try and make some sense of what is going on. It consumes itself slowly and tastes the memories of that substance. D&D Beyond explains this strange behaviour. Independent skeletons, temporarily or permanently free of a master's control, sometimes pantomime actions of their past lives, their bones echoing the rote behaviours of their former living selves. The skeleton of a miner might lift a pick and start chipping away at stone walls. The skeleton of a guard might strike up a post at a random doorway. The skeleton of a dragon might lie down on a pile of treasure, while the skeleton of a horse crops grass that it can't eat. Left alone in a ballroom, a skeleton of nobles might continue an eternally unfinished dance. When skeletons encounter living creatures, the necromantic energy that drives them compels them to kill, unless they are commanded by their masters to refrain from doing so. They attack without mercy and fight until destroyed, for skeletons possess little sense of self and even less sense of self-preservation. They don't want to stay on the prime material plane, any more than you or I would want to stand in the middle of a bonfire. They can react to living beings like we would react to an out-of-control fire. We seek to snuff it out. They seek to snuff out life. They have no remorse, no mercy, no pity, no empathy. They feel only hatred for life. Their physical form and whatever intellect they still possess gives them a sort of a problem-solving cunning. Again, in 5th edition that sums it up well, rather than break its limbs attempting to batter its way through an iron door. A skeleton tries the handle first. If that doesn't work, it searches for another way through or around the obstacle. Coming from an eternal void, skeletons have a very different perspective of time. They really can just stand and stare at nothing in darkness and silence for centuries and feel nothing. Sealing a skeleton inside a coffin or other compartment won't drive them any more insane than they already are. When a cleric attempts to turn the undead, you can see why some of them will flee from the cleric and others will simply be destroyed. Those who are too weak will lose all connection to the prime material plane and vanish back into the void, and others will be blasted by positive divine energy and be quite overloaded by it, like a blast of heat and light and noise that they really do not want to experience. Holy water, holy symbols, blessings and such can have a devastating effect on the undead because of the positive divine and vital power infused in them. Skeletons are very simple though. You really only need to smash their bones and expose them to raw, unfiltered prime material power to force them out of this plane. Skeletons can understand all the language their bone form knew in its former life, so they might be able to sense other aspects of their former selves as well. Do they recognize their host bone's former loved ones, I wonder? Casting a resurrecting ritual on a skeleton will also banish the undead entity back to the negative material plane, as their original soul is restored to the reconstructed physical fleshy body. A person or creature that has been a skeleton or other form of undead during its time absent from the prime material plane will of course have no memories of whatever its corpse got up to while it was away, and in most cases those restored to life have no memory of what they were doing in the afterlife either. Sometimes they'll also have no memory of how their life ended and wake up quite confused as to where they are and what just happened. Unless whoever restored them was a cheapskate and now they also have some missing limbs to deal with. Mind you, if an adventuring party does have the means to do so, sometimes all it takes is cutting off the finger of a fallen companion and bringing it back to town for a full resurrection. It makes me wonder if some monster races think humanoid adventurers have the regenerative powers of trolls. Skeletons come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes, the majority of which are humanoid, because humanoids just tend to prefer that. All sites where there are heavy concentrations of negative energy also tend to be locations with convenient humanoid remains, so most skeletons you find in the game tend to be humanoids. There are a lot of variations around though. If we take some specific to the Forgotten Realms setting, on the continent of Faerun you can find Dire Guards, which are the improved version of the Bane Guard skeletons which were created by the god Bane. The Bane Guard can phase into and out of the ethereal plane and also hurl bolts of energy in combat, while the Dire Guard have much better senses, being able to see invisible creatures and objects. Plus they have this shadowy armour made of some kind of dark force. It's an interesting thing to consider the senses of a skeleton. They have no sense of smell or taste, obviously, and they might not have a sense of touch, but they can see and hear, and since they have no eyes, what are they seeing with? Does this mean that a skeleton can see through any part of its body? What about crawling claws? They only have blind sight out to 30 feet and are blind beyond that. So that's some sort of a tremor sense, while skeletons can see just fine and even have 60-foot dark vision, regardless of if they even have a head or not. So, begs the question. Another form of Faerunian skeleton is the fiery blazing bones skeletons created when a spellcaster's contingency spell goes wrong. They can be found in Mithranor mainly, and seem to be very rare elsewhere. They are a bit different to the fiery lightning or frost skeletons, which are deliberately enchanted and created forms of a skeletal undead, always under some caster's control. There are skeletal types that are quite different on a more fundamental level, such as the burn bones, which appear similar to the blazing bones found in Mithranor but are selected higher level members of the Church of Cyric, who have been transformed with a portion of Cyric's own power invested into them, and are more like a form of profane cleric lich. The blazing bone skeletons look like blackened skeletons constantly on fire, wearing the holy symbol of Cyric. They actually still command the same divine powers they had while alive, and they would have kept their flesh, except the raw divine power of Cyric coursing through them literally burnt the flesh from their bones, which, of course, is a horrible state of existence, and if they think about it or truly feel it, which they don't, unless they even ever falter in their absolute devotion of Cyric, well, he's a god well known for not tolerating the veneration of any other gods among his faithful, so I guess they just don't. But yeah, if they do, it's excruciatingly painful. On the extreme opposite side of that is the crystal skeletons, which are always a humanoid who has been magically transformed to be made from ice. Skeletons in particularly poor condition, or who have existed for a very long time, gradually degrade and start to break down. And there's also the stats for the dust skeleton. This is from Dragon Magazine number 234, published in October 1996, which is an excellent special issue chock full of undead stuff. It's required reading, honestly. Including all sorts of undead dragons, which I'll be talking about later, not just the Dracolich, undead dragon skeletons being one of them. The article says that an intact dragon skeleton is not necessary for creation of this undead type. The skull, spine, and claws of the dragon are the only pieces that are absolutely required. The bones of some other large creature may be substituted for any other part that is missing from the dragon skeleton, so you can get some weird combinations. Dragon skeletons may be created from any dragon species, but are usually created from young or small dragons that are unsuitable for creation of a more powerful undead Dracolich type. As with dragon zombies, any available spirit can serve to animate the skeleton, and modifiers for the alignment and species of the dragon are unnecessary because that dragon soul is no longer there. Repeated attempts to create a skeleton dragon are possible if the necromancer does not succeed on their first attempt, if they've got the time and components to do it. Skeleton dragons suffer only half damage from edged or piercing weapons and are immune to cold-based attacks and poison and exhaustion. They are mindless and can follow relatively simple commands. This magazine is also where we learn about the dust skeleton. It says, although they look like normal skeletons, dust skeletons weigh about 1/5 as much, as their bones are dried almost to the point of disintegration. Wherever they walk, they leave a trail of blue-grey dust hanging in the air. This dust is poisonous, and anyone approaching within 10 feet feels mildly nauseous, so they get the poisoned condition. Dust skeletons are used to break enemy formations by disabling large number of troops. These decrepit things are not normally equipped with weapons or armor, as they are only really useful when they're destroyed. So they run in, releasing a plume of toxins that require a constitution saving throw but by the living, or it causes a form of paralysis in the severe cases. These are typically creations of necromancers and alchemists, and they require a special resin to be made containing a paralyzing venom and that can be coated inside the bones before the skeleton is animated. Going further afield, a little something for the Dark Sun setting fans is the Defiling Skeleton, which, by the way, works fantastically well for the minions of Nicobolas in the Magic the Gathering Ravnica setting if you feel like running a War of the Spark campaign. Those of you who play Magic the Gathering will know what I'm talking about. The Defiling Skeletons are among the most feared and reviled of undead soldiers. An obsidian jewel is embedded in each skeleton's forehead. Many of them have blackened bones as though they've been burned. All carry weapons, usually swords or clubs, and the damn things absorb life energy in order to regenerate and reassemble themselves. When a Defiling Skeleton is reduced to 0 hit points, it collapses and becomes inert for 1 round. The next round, it defiles an area, sucking it dry of life force. Though only plants wither and die immediately, other creatures are caused great pain, so again the poisoned condition. While this defiling takes place, the obsidian jewel in the skeleton's forehead glows brightly. The next round it rises up, restored to full hit points, and striking the skeleton while it is inert or regenerating has no effect, nor does it delay the regeneration. Only the destruction of the jewel embedded in its forehead or its successful dispel magic can stop this regeneration and actually kill the things. Skeletons used specifically for the purposes of tearing into ranks of troops during war can include the Spike Skeleton, which is just covered in spines, thorns, hooks, nails and such. They don't need to carry weapons, they are weapons. The thorns might actually be carefully carved from bone, in which case they're easier to enchant along with the rest of the skeleton or restore it with necromantic magic. A typical version would be a supernatural venom that causes a severe fever in the victim. This is actually a magical amulet from that Dragon magazine. That's a specialty of liches called the Bone Briar Amulet, which causes spikes to grow from bones on utterance of a command word. Not recommended for living beings to try using those things. For something completely outlandish, and something a lot of dungeon masters rarely think about, is the possibility of a skeleton being removed and animated by a necromancer from a fresh corpse, and then animating what is left over as well, so you get a 2-for-1 deal on any corpse your necromancer can dig up. What a bargain. Dragon 234 has this to say about them. Often ignored as merely the leftover ingredients from the creation of a skeleton, boneless are among the most versatile undead species known. They are strong, flexible, and able to perform almost all the activities they did in life. Living creatures find the boneless to be unsettlingly grotesque, even more than other more deteriorated undead such as zombies. Their skin is translucent reddish brown and severely wrinkled, folded and puckered. More often than not, boneless must stitch their clothing directly onto their bodies in order to keep it from sliding off. Their heads are shrunken, withered parodies of what they were in life. Boneless are rarely recognised even by close relatives. They sit on highly flexible, stretched out necks. Boneless limbs are distended and agile, able to slip through the smallest of openings. They do not, however, support the body well, and boneless often have to be seen walking around on all fours. Although they are usually mindless automatons, boneless are assumed to retain most of their intelligence. Boneless are generally sad, lonely creatures. They feel the pain of their new situation more keenly than many of the other animated undead, because the only thing that separates them from their original appearance is quite literally a backbone. Of all the corporeal undead, they are physically the closest to normal, but paradoxically also among the most horribly disfigured. Along with the advantages common to all undead, boneless also find that their unusually flexible bodies provide them with protection from blunt weapons. They suffer only half damage from these. They're also able to squeeze into incredibly small spaces, which can be quite handy when trying to hide from would-be monster slayers. Their unique physique likewise provides boneless undead with the ability to constrict their victims with lethal bludgeoning strength, so they actually make a pretty good complement to skeletons that may also have came from their bodies. I know a lot of you are going to have fun with that idea, and I apologise to your players in advance. So, the variety of skeletons is not only expanded by what can be crafted and enchanted into the bones of humanoids. There are giant skeletons. There are also monstrous and animal skeletons. A necromancer can even craft golems of bone in shapes that conform to no living creature. And here's where my imagination really takes off. For example, during one campaign I had a drifting fortress of a powerful necromancer. Within a misty demiplane it floated, an edifice of stone which had crawling undead all over the exterior, ready to swarm over anything that got too close, or that attempted to escape. Inside the place, the characters arrived via a portal, and found wide passages and huge halls. The walls were pillars of stone and the floor were large flagstones. The footsteps of the characters echoed as it was so silent inside the place. They entered a library, except instead of there being books on the shelves, there were severed undead heads. Each could be spoken to and ordered to repeat any information from a book it was forced to read in the moments before its transformation into an undead archive. When the players did burst into the main hall and confronted the necromancer, a lich, he laughed and basically snapped his fingers, and all the flagstones under the character's feet flipped over like trapdoors because every single one of them was being held up overhead by skeletons down below. Hundreds of skeletons. The characters had one hell of a fight, wiping out metric tons of skeleton warriors, and had a memorable encounter with zombies that snapped their own bones to make piercing and stabbing attacks easier, tearing one of their own group up to fashion its limbs into weapons. Eventually the player characters managed to escape, but it was a close call and one of the more memorable side quests of that campaign. I don't even remember why they went there. Skeletons and zombies can be used for all sorts of tasks, not just guards, assassins and expendable troops. They are tireless, so they can pick up tools and perform manual labour as long as they are properly controlled and instructed what to do beforehand. Left to its task, a skeleton can dig and plant a whole field of potatoes over a day and night, with no breaks, no need for water or food or sleep. Authorities, and particularly clergy in many regions of FERRUIT, will not tolerate undead farm workers and labourers, of course, but some regions have no problem with it at all, the best example being Thay. Even so, while skeletons are not as disgusting to deal with as zombies, because, they're not rotting and stuff, they don't smell as bad, they have a palpable air of menace about them. I mean, it's spooky. They may be held firmly in check by magic, but there's often the sense that these things are just waiting for something to break the bonds and free them to murder every living thing that they can. Just to give you one last bit of useful info, if you have a skeleton creature that retains its knowledge and skills it had when it was fully alive, it's called a bone creature, not a skeleton. I may circle back to talk more about more advanced forms of undead skeletal monsters, but for now, please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some sweet merchandise from my Teespring shop, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.